Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, 3 words, Prince of Persia, how do they make you feel?
Oh, they make me feel old, Scott. They make me feel old. I remember getting the 3rd Prince of Persia game for one of my early birthdays and really enjoying it. But yes,
God, that's gonna make me feel even older. If you were getting something like, was it Twin Thrones, Two Thrones, whatever the third
Two
one
Thrones?
was? When you were young, I played Warrior Within when I thought Godsmack were cool, which was like 2005. So,
I didn't even know Godsmack was a thing when I played Warrior Within, but I like that you could decapitate people.
Exactly, that's what, back when the Attitude Era of video games in the early 2000s, where it was just sort of like everyone's gruff, everyone's got a goatee, Jack's doing the rounds with his little green goatee, and Prince of Persia followed suit. I was a big fan, but anyway, the reason we're talking about Prince of Persia is that I was going to say new gameplay footage, it's actually from 2012, it's just that because there's been lots of conversations around what IPs Ubisoft might be revealing at their makeshift, whatever their replacement for their E3 showcase is going to be, Prince of Persia started doing the rounds again, and people found footage of this game called Prince of Persia Redemption from 2012, which seemed pretty far along in production. There's it's like about 3 minutes gameplay clip of it, which is worth watching. It's just like, I don't know what the hell happened behind the scenes, assuming they will find out eventually. But we're just going to talk about that, because if they're ever going to revive Prince of Persia, it seems like they would just carry a lot of the assets across from this, because the sequence that's out there is a big, like an escape sequence. There's some combat, and then there's a big old traversal thing, and there's some, like I said, they show off some different combat mechanics. And just for me, I mean, we can break down different facets of this, but I forgot how many signature elements Prince of Persia has, like the time dagger and rewinding if you mess up, and just that idea of enemies dissolving into sand and things like that.
Yes.
Things that sort of made it iconic. Like, I mean, I guess, where do you come down on the footage in general?
Well, I think it looks good. I do think we have to bear in mind that although it looks very convincing, apparently, from what I've read anyway, that was all just like a pre-render kind of goal, so it wasn't actually playable. It was just like a target render of what they were pitching to Ubisoft to hopefully, be able to make that in game. So it almost looks a bit, if it looks too good to be true, that's probably because it is, if that makes sense. It's very, very smooth. But if they could have hit that, and you imagine that they could in 2020 or something, like, I do think it looked really kind of stunning. And like you said, when they have that first combat encounter and the enemy turns into sand, I thought, oh, you know what? I could go for a bit of Prince of Persia. I like that. I like that element. I love the idea of having that time dagger and being able to rewind. And I like how it was implemented in combat this time around. I thought that was really neat. Like, a lot of those animations, although very much scripted, looked so interesting and cool. It was almost like, I don't know, they were smashing DMC with the regular Prince of Persia platforming. And I've always wondered, since the 2010 Forgotten Sands, how they would even update Prince of Persia, because to me, it's quite an old hat series. It reminds me of my childhood, and I always wondered if they could even update it, because Assassin's Creed was kind of such a natural progression of that similar style of gameplay. But watching this, I think we could do it. We could do it.
Well, I tell you what's fascinating is that, like, Assassin's Creed started as a Prince of Persia, like Prince of Persia : Assassins, that became Assassin's Creed. And I kind of think that, considering the new direction that Creed has now, where it's this like big, overblown, just massive open world action RPG, it doesn't feel anything like it used to. But even Prince of Persia, like, started as that weird, started as a 2D game. It was kind of mind blowing back in, I don't know, the 80s or whenever it first came out. I wasn't on this earth back then, and you certainly weren't. But it was a big deal. And then when they dropped Sands of Time, Warrior Within, Two Thrones, they all felt like these sort of medium advancing, platforming in 3D, where you were wall running and you were rolling through stuff, and it was all very seamless and fluid. And you on about like the way that you sort of used the dagger in combat. I remember thinking it was just so stylish that you could, like effortlessly or seamlessly go from one big traversal sequence straight into combat. The camera zooms right in, or like snap cuts to your dagger going into a guy, and then you're back out again, and stuff like that. I thought like Prince of Persia had a flow to it that I know people associate with the original 2D ones. And I guess that's what they're aiming for in this new target render, because there's a bit near the end where he's just going wall run and running across some crumbling stairs and stuff, that like the sense of flow and the speed and the immediacy does come through. But I guess that's what you would aim for, try and have like a almost Mirror's Edge type thing where you're comboing together all this different stuff that lets you get through as like fast as possible.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, you mentioned there like the original games had such a distinct style. I have this like memory that will not leave me of being a young kid, of getting Sands of Time for the first time and doing the first wall run and rewinding time and thinking to myself, I'm never going to get bored of this. I could play this forever. Obviously, I did get bored of it, but the fact that it wowed me so much, it's something that's like stuck with me when memories of family members have, disappeared. I've got Prince of Persia in there.
Just you sitting in like a blank room, just surrounded by blur, but it's just you and one console and nothing else.
Yeah, me in the first level of Prince of Persia Sands of Time. But I do think you make a good point about, Assassin's Creed was the spiritual successor, but that's become so unwieldy and something completely different in the modern era. And I quite like the most recent ways, and I do think that series after like Syndicate was in need of a good kick up the bum, but now because it's become so different, it has left the space for Prince of Persia to come back and kind of occupy a more linear kind of experience where you do mix parkour with combat. And I agree that if you manage to nail the flow of this gameplay trailer, or at least something close to it, you can have something quite special. It almost reminded me of kind of Uncharted or the modern Tomb Raiders, the way you were moving from the platforming sequences into combat, and you could like, that moment in Uncharted 4 that wowed everyone in the trailer where you swing from the rope and you come down and you nail that guy with a punch. I got the same feeling from this trailer, like watching the way everything like connected together. And I do think there is space for that, especially in Ubisoft's catalog, which is now so open world focused. You could still have like sandbox elements in this, but you can make a more focused Prince of Persia game now, more so than you could 10 years ago, I think.
I tell you, I have a question for you. Are you sick of those sections in every action game where everything's just falling away and all you're really doing is just holding forward? And just I remember like, my breakpoint was in Tomb Raider. It was in Rise of the Tomb Raider. There's a bit where you're fleeing some helicopters that are chasing you and there's missiles coming after you, but all you're doing is holding forward, and occasionally you jump. There's always a zip line at some point as well. And I just remember thinking, I've seen this a million times. And I know that, Prince of Persia sort of laid the groundwork for Uncharted to then capitalize on that stuff. And I obviously know Uncharted and Naughty Dog are sort of known for it a bit more, the whole collapsing thing while your protagonist struggles type thing. But do you think that stuff is fundamentally outdated? Are you as sick of it as I am?
It's funny you should mention Tomb Raider, man, because I'm going through Shadow of the Tomb Raider 2 years too late at the moment. And there's a moment early on where you're running away from a tsunami. And it's so beautifully rendered, and it looks so gorgeous, and the level of destruction is something I haven't seen in a Tomb Raider game before. But it is basically,
so plain.
Although it's more bombastic than ever, what you're doing is essentially just, like you said, pressing forward, watching things crumble around you, and having those near-miss moments that you probably know aren't near-miss and are way more scripted than you expect. So I do think, that element is a bit stale and would need to be more dynamic and shook up going forward. But I do think there's a way you can do it, because there's a reason that cliche became a cliche, and that's that it worked, you know what I mean? Like, you can reinvent that and do something different with it. I mean, I'm not a game developer, I have no ideas what they would do with it, but a talented team like Ubisoft, they've got to have some thoughts on the matter.
I would love it if they did something that was more dynamic, because you always know those sequences are coming, and once you're in the middle of them, it just feels like you're trying to get to the end of it. It doesn't feel like anything can change other than just holding forward or running down this gauntlet that they've designed. And it's almost like a really old school, PS1 platforming section. It reminds me of Crash running away from the boulder. It's kind of like that. I know they paid tribute to that in Uncharted. But I think if you did it more dynamically, where if you're exploring these bigger environments and you trigger this over here, which makes this crumble or makes this weaker, so that if you go to this second, or you go over here first, you go over here, then that affects other parts of the environment, and you sort of dynamically create this thing falling apart, or you create different pathways based on the way that you interact with that big space. I would love it if they did something like that, something that gets away from like you said, like the sort of rote stuff, the outdated stuff. We should touch on the combat as well, because the thing is, everyone makes the Dark Souls comparison, because as soon as the camera is behind someone and they're locked onto something and they're turtling around something, that's just been codified as Dark Souls so much that like even my brain, when I was watching this, I was like, oh, it's a bit of a Dark Souls, but no, at all. He's just locking onto an enemy. But I did love the sort of stylized side of it, where he eventually defeats this big golem thing by the golem like swings it in with a hammer, and he sort of like does like an evade, steps on it, and then runs up and finishes the dude off. But he's also doing something time-based, where he's sort of rewinding a version of that enemy to get them in a specific place to set up for that finisher in the first place. What do you think of that stuff, like time in combat?
Yeah, I think that's like such a interesting element that I haven't really seen kind of done before, like being able to manipulate your enemy's actions to get them exactly where you want them to be without, messing up the flow of combat. I think that's kind of always a trade-off in action games, trying to make the player feel empowered and like they're in control of the action while still giving them those kind of jaw-dropping moments where things just click and you do manage to pull off one of those finishes. And a lot of the time, I think developers get around that by using slow motion. They let you obviously stop and pick your shots and make those kind of John Wick-esque moments by slowing down the time. But this is more interesting in a way because then you get to kind of, you can visualize an opportunity, and even if you didn't have the reflexes quick enough to kind of pull it off, you can then reset the person so then you can do it, you know what I mean? And it's a slightly different method of doing it rather than just, hitting a button, slowing down time, picking your shot. I like it, I dig it. I think I want to see that mechanic implemented in other action games because I've never quite seen that series of steps kind of play out in that way before. There's probably games that do it that I completely haven't played, but for me that was quite interesting.
I tell you what, I'm desperately trying to think of games that utilize time in combat in terms of rewinding stuff to, like you said, set people up. And my mind just went to Blinks the Time Sweeper, which is a game that you might not even know existed from the 2000s. So. It was like a launch game for the Xbox, where you play as a little cat called Blinks, and you could rewind time, pause it, fast forward, things like that. It was brilliant, but they didn't go anywhere with that. But yeah, there's probably something based on time-based combat mechanics that the chat can find out below. But yeah, I mean, let us know what you think down in the comments below of the return of Prince of Persia. None of this is obviously confirmed. This demo, this conceptual footage is from 2012, but there are a lot of conversations going around as to which IP Ubisoft will revive going forward. So maybe it could come true anyway. For now, though, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.